Everything started so well. Football felt easy for Benfica at the start of the 2022-23 season under manager Roger Schmidt.
I love football, and if you love football, you love Benfica.
It was clear that the change in ideas and a change in managerial style was bearing fruit, and when coupled with some quality signings, Benfica didn't lose a single match until after the 2022 World Cup. Roger Ball was in full flight and catching the attention of the rest of Europe, especially after topping a group that had PSG and Juve in it in the Champions League. But then the Enzo Fernandez saga occurred, and while things suddenly felt much more difficult, the title was still clinched all the same. Without an important figure like Enzo, Roger Schmidt and the fellas still managed to pull off number 38, something we had to wait 4 long years for. And it wasn't the most beautiful of title wins, despite the incredible start to the season. At times it felt like we were just surviving the league, allowing Porto to get dangerously close to us and forced into deciding the title on the final day of the season, despite having at times, a 10-point lead. Trophies do have a habit of causing you to ignore the struggles, at least for a time, because unfortunately, that feeling of just surviving continued into this season. Now, I am not super superstitious.
I am a little stitious.
But I have been holding off on doing any videos on Benfica this season because, well, after seeing João Mario's decline after I celebrated in video form what was a great season at that point for him last spring, I wanted to stay away from the Benfica coverage and just let the boys breathe. Because what happened to João Mario after that? I didn't want to be reactionary, nor did I want to rain on our parade this season when results belied the performances. And I still am not calling for the heads of anyone in the club. But after an ungodly drubbing at the hands of FC Porto, things need to be addressed. I hope this is a blip, that this was just 2 difficult away matches that we bounced back from. But based on how things have gone under this current manager, things need to be put under the microscope a bit. It's one thing to lose to Porto. We don't have a great record at the Dragão, and we often struggle against them no matter where we play them, despite the 2 victories this season. But it's another thing entirely to lose in that fashion. We've lost 5-0 to Porto before, with Porto boasting the likes of Hulk and Falcao, and with the team at the peak of their powers. But this Porto side is not at the peak of their powers. They were depleted, and even their own supporters will tell you that this isn't the best version of Porto from the past few years. There's results, and then there's how the result happened. And the way Benfica played was inexcusable. They weren't there, and honestly, a result like this was on its way for Benfica, given how we have been set up by Schmidt and how the team has performed in the recent past. I wanted to let Benfica breathe a bit because despite many of our victories feeling razor thin, there was a chance that maybe we find some form and we'd go on to be a terrifying threat to the league once again. I mean, we were still leading the league after all. But even in matches with a decent Benfica-dominated scoreline, there are moments when the minnows of the league have exposed our weaknesses. Because our weaknesses are not easily hidden, this has led to Benfica rolling along unconvincingly this season, getting results, but often thanks to individual brilliance at times, rather than the team dominating as a cohesive unit. The cracks have been shown, and they are now threatening to split this season apart. And it's not all dark. There have been some individuals that have shined bright and caused supporters to smile. And again, we are still in 3 competitions at this moment in time. So I don't want this to be seen as Benfica being a total unmitigated disaster this season. But my frustrations with certain choices since about the midway point of last season reached their breaking point with the decisions made against Sporting and Porto and the results that came with them. Let's try to take the middle path though, and not jump to hysterics. Take a measured look at Benfica. The good under Roger Schmidt, where the cracks have shown, how he has been stubborn, and we can be critical where he deserves it, but also let's look at whether it's really so bad that we need to scrap everything and try again with a new manager based on the competitions we're still in and how he managed to find glory just last season.
Enzo Fernandez.
Losing important players is always difficult for managers, and unfortunately, when you manage Benfica, it's a reality that you have to come to grasp with. It's something that you will only get so much sympathy for, though, because it's a reality that every other manager that has preceded you has had to deal with at a high rate for about a decade and a half now, when Benfica's turning talent to profit wheels really went in full motion. And it's a reality every manager that follows you will deal with also. It's part of this job. The truly great managers will show flexibility in these situations. They will show an ability to recover from the players that they have lost and mask Benfica's weaknesses or find solutions to cover them in a way that doesn't feel like, well, in the fullback case at times, that doesn't feel like our flanks are being held together by a bunch of popsicle sticks and masking tape. There is no denying that the entire Enzo Fernandez fiasco from January of 2023 was a bit of a destabilizing, unwelcome distraction last season. To lose an integral player, especially in that will he, won't he, he's committed, now he's not fashion, at the midpoint of the season, I mean, that sucks. Especially since no reinforcement was brought in right away. And I feel for Roger there. At the end of that season, you lose Grimaldo. I mean, as you can see with how he has been utilized at Bayer Leverkusen and the impact he has had on their season, Grimaldo is clearly a special player, a player that was greatly appreciated at Benfica, though at times, I think we all, myself included, were a bit guilty of taking him for granted. But now that he's gone, and the fact that the left back position is one of our most problematic positions, we all miss Alex greatly. And to a lesser degree, but still important all the same in my opinion, losing Gilberto. I know Gilberto was a bit of a meme player at Benfica, but he was a great squad player, not a star, not someone you want to rely upon week in, week out, but a player who you want to have in your squad, a player that will always give 100%, even if they aren't a perfect player. Last season, he played in 35 matches. He scored a couple of important goals and set up a couple others also. And there's Gonçalo Ramos, who was sold off to PSG, well loaned and then sold. Gonçalo's sale felt like a decent deal for Benfica once we get that cash. I found Gonçalo was a little too hot and cold for me at times. He would go on streaks where he was seemingly unstoppable, and then others where he would miss from the doorstep of the goal as if he was the opposition's best center back, you know? Assuming Benfica recruited well, I felt like we would have been covered in that position, but who was brought in? Artur Cabral from Fiorentina for about 20 million euros, and in January, Marcos Leonardo from Santos. So after losing Gilberto, who was brought in? Nobody for the right back position. After losing Grimaldo, who was brought in? David Jurasek, who was highly rated in the Czech Republic, as well as Juan Bernat from PSG. Bernat has been MIA due to injury, playing just 245 minutes, while Jurasek was sent on loan to Hoffenheim in January already, and so Alvaro Carreras was brought in from United to help in that position. In theory, who was brought in to replace Enzo? Orkun Kokcu, a player who was incredible in the Eredivisie for Feyenoord, player of the year, and seemingly had the look of a perfect addition to our midfield. Beyond that, some signings were made for the future of the right wing position in Rolheiser and Prestiani this past January, neither of which have been able to have any minutes on the pitch, so they're not even worth speaking about. And I will absolutely address how these signings have done, because the thing is, there are options in these positions, but Roger Schmidt just seems loath to use them at times.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is?
Seeing Benfica's 11 before every match feels like Groundhog Day. Before the match even starts, every Benfica supporter can tell you with about, honestly, 90% accuracy exactly what the lineup is going to be, irrespective of the opposition. And it's funny because naturally, given the nature of my channel, I spoke with a few PSV or even just Eredivisie supporters about Roger Schmidt once it was announced that he was signing with Benfica. Things that came up the most, that were the most consistent, were that he would constantly make changes to PSV's lineup, and that he was stubborn with his tactics and substitutions. You know, plan B is to do plan A better kind of thing. Boy, have the tactics and subs thing rung true. Well, he has swung violently in the opposite direction with his lineups, to the point where, like I said, I could forecast for you the starting 11 for most of Benfica's matches in April, if you'd like. On top of that, he was criticized for having a really bad record in big games. We don't seem to change our approach in matches in a notable way. Similarly to how we can forecast who will play in each match, whether it's against Braga or Boavista, Porto or Portimonense, every Benfica supporter can tell you exactly how we will play, what our approach will be. And if we can see it as amateurs watching from home or in the stands, then certainly our opposition and their scouts can see it as well. Because Benfica can afford talented players and has a superior squad to most teams in the league, even if our tactics aren't perfect, we get away with it thanks to having players who can win matches for us on their own. Di Maria, Rafa lately, etc. Schmidt, at this point in time, still has a positive record against Porto and Sporting thanks to last season and the first half of this season. But when we come up against our biggest rivals domestically and decent opposition in the Champions League, these managers have figured out ways to exploit our weaknesses defensively and nullify our attack for the most part. Even when we came up against Toulouse, a team that is having trouble cracking the top 10 in Ligue 1, we should have lost that second leg. We've been found out in a sense. Granted, the second half against Sporting recently was encouraging and there's still a second leg, but overall, it still rings true. But what has annoyed me most often is the lineups and sticking to favorites in the attack in particular, no matter what form they are in. João Mario and Rafa will be in the attack, the latter of which has justified his place with his recent form. The former, it's largely been a frustrating season with solid performances sprinkled in here and there. These guys, namely João Mario, will be there no matter what, but just shuffled around rather than benched for poor play. Sometimes he'll be on the left, sometimes he'll be in the cam position, sometimes he'll be a little bit deeper. And so let me show you how Roger has swung in the opposite direction when it comes to rotating the squad. To his credit, he did exactly that in February, a big shakeup against lower league teams Vizela and Portimonense. And what did he get? A 6-1 win and a 4-0 win. That's great. But there have been so many times, like the recent matches against Porto and Sporting, where we could have used a striker up front instead of little tiny Rafa, a striker like Artur Cabral, for example, who can outmuscle the defenders and hold up the ball for runs off of him. Rafa versus Diomande and Sebastian Coates, come on. Rafa versus Pepe and Otavio, please. Of course he doesn't stand a chance against them physically. Why not Cabral? And what on earth is going on with Marcos Leonardo and the treatment he's getting? The guy is averaging a goal every 25 minutes, and yet it's like the more he scored goals, the less Roger Schmidt wanted to use him. At first I thought it was, down to fitness and pressing style that Roger uses, which isn't as ferocious as some teams press. But anyway, I chalked it down to a fitness thing perhaps. But the man arrived at the beginning of January. He should be fit by now, if that was the case. He has 4 goals in 101 minutes in the Liga, and yet he played for 1 minute against Portimonense and was an unused sub against Sporting and Porto. Make it make sense, man. It really makes you ask the question, why are some players given so much grace when they are out of form and others can't get a game, even when they have shown that they can provide goals regularly? They can shake things up. Another area, the fullback positions. Let's start at right back. As mentioned, Gilberto left, and with Ba injured, Orsnes was consistently played at right back. That's fine. You don't have another player that can play there due to poor recruitment, I guess. So do what you have to with Orsnes. On the other side, at left back, it gets weirder. What on earth is Schmidt doing? We just signed Carreras, who has looked pretty solid when we've seen him since joining us in January. I mean, to look pretty solid when you join mid-season is impressive in itself. And on top of that, you are an actual left back. Wow. But what does Schmidt do? He starts someone out of position. May that be Moratu, who is a center back and is slow, or Frederick Orsnes again, whom I'd rather see either on the wing or the midfield. If Moratu is playing center back, his speed isn't an issue, but teams get a lot of joy counterattacking against us, especially because Schmidt likes playing 2 midfielders side by side who both like to get forward, leaving us especially vulnerable to counters. Again, make it make sense. Just play the left back. I love Orsnes as much as the next guy. He's an incredible servant to the club, but we have left backs. You didn't want to use Jurasek, and he was rushed out the door after 500 minutes of play, which is too quick for my liking. But anyway, okay, fine. We'll get you Carreras, and you still prefer either an out-of-position Moratu or move Frederick Orsnes to his 10th different position on the pitch. Against Sporting, Orsnes started as left back, Ba was injured, and so instead of putting in Carreras and moving Orsnes over to the right, what did Schmidt do? He put on Moratu so that Benfica's flanks could get torched even more. And this without even considering the substitutions and game management, which border on nonsensical at times. We're losing by a goal. We're pressuring Sporting really well and have them contained in the final 15 to 20 minutes of the match. Wouldn't that be a good time to bring on another striker? No. Cabral subbed on in the 92nd minute, game over by the 96th. He's really losing me with the player selections and the stubbornness these days. It's hard to understand what's going on. So Benfica has the squad to be able to win the league. I mean, credit to Sporting, they are playing incredibly well under Amorim again and have a 1-point lead with a match in hand. With Gyökeres leading the line, they have been very impressive. But with Benfica, you can see that the talent is there to flourish, but they're holding themselves back or are being held back. Let me be clear, I still believe that Schmidt himself can be successful with Benfica again, and I hope that he shows us he can. What has me worried is reading about how stubborn he was at PSV and how stubborn he has been at times with Benfica. That said, he has also shown that he is capable of changing his ways, at least when it comes to how he would constantly change his lineups at PSV, and he fixed that at Benfica, but he's taken it too far in the other direction. If he can find a happy middle ground, Benfica will be all the better for it. Start trusting some of the signings that have been made for both the left back and the striker position, and stop playing favorites with guys when they aren't doing well, because you can't afford to do so. In fact, I'll even double down here. I find it quite insane that people want to move on from Schmidt already, that they want to sack him mid-season. It's everything I hate about modern football. Cut things off before they have a chance to recover and start over again, and again, and again. It's short-term thinking, as if the expectation is that, the sport of football is ending soon. The sport will come to an end, so you can't afford a year without trophies. And get this, the season isn't even over yet. We don't know if we're ending trophyless, and with some small adjustments, we could potentially win silverware. Let's finish where we started. I hope that this is the wake-up call that Benfica has needed in order to grow stronger, and I genuinely hope that Roger Schmidt will find success with this side again, something that is absolutely possible still. He's done it before. I fear, based on history, that the same mistakes will continue to be made, and the razor-thin margins could start to swing against us now, where previously they swung in our favor. But I hope that this is just a blip on the radar of what turns out to be another successful season in some capacity and a campaign to learn from. But that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you aren't subscribed yet, then go ahead and do so for more from me here at Rabonus TV. Beyond that, thanks again for spending some time with me, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.